Protests against vaccine mandates gather steam across the country. China's hypersonic test raises questions about American missile defenses. And back to basketball. The NBA opens its new season, headaches and all. Wednesday Need to Know. Let's go. Good morning, this is Cheddar's Need to Know podcast for Wednesday, October 20th. I'm Jill Wagner with Carlo Versano. Hello, Carlo.
It's already Wednesday, huh? And time flies when you don't sleep, right?
It's funny you say that because I was, we label our documents by the day in terms of the newsletter anyway, and I was looking to see what we had, and I was looking on Tuesday's newsletter, and I'm like,
yeah.
That's weird that Carlo hasn't really gotten this started yet. It's, 4:30 in the morning. What's he doing? And yes, I was on the wrong day.
Yes. Also, October 20th, my favorite month, almost over. Crazy.
I know. We're starting to get into these seasonal depression mode, in my house anyway.
Yeah, I'm with you there.
All right, let's get to some news here. About 24 Chicago police officers have now been placed on no-pay status for refusing to tell their department their vaccination status. So this is a follow-up to what we were briefly discussing yesterday. In Washington, 127 members of the state police have been fired for defying that state's vaccine mandate. Southwest Airlines, meanwhile, scrapping its plan to put unvaccinated employees on unpaid leave when the federal deadline goes into effect on December 8th, bowing to pushback from its pilots union. The only In-N-Out burger in San Francisco was temporarily shut down for refusing to check customers' vaccination status, with the burger chain saying, quote, "We refuse to become the vaccination police for any government." So, Carlo, these are just some of the protests against vaccine mandates that are happening across the country.
Yes, indeed. Opponents of these vaccine mandates dealt another blow in the Supreme Court. Justices declining yesterday to block a vaccine requirement for Maine healthcare workers. It's the first time the Supreme Court has weighed in on a statewide vaccine mandate, but it shows you where their head is at in these various mandates and whether they're unconstitutional or not. Also, this Delta CEO Ed Bastian telling Cheddar, telling our colleague Christian Scholler yesterday that that airline's novel vaccination policy, in which it basically fines unvaccinated employees $200 a month in order to stay on its health care plan. Delta says that it's working, with 90% of its workers now vaxxed, which is good, of course, but not quite as good as United, right? United has 99.5% of its workers vaccinated by just having a straight up mandate.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating stuff. I'm waiting to see what's going to happen with schools and whether or not vaccines are going to be mandated for kids. My gut is that they won't be, but
yeah, I don't think
this
so
is
either.
Actually something Megyn Kelly had been really going crazy about, because I guess she sends her kids to private school and they're mandating vaccines, and she was, I don't know, she did an interview with Scott Gottlieb and kind of got into it with him. And it went off the rails because that wasn't really why he was on to defend the vaccine mandate policy. He was more on just to talk about the vaccines in general, because he's obviously not coming up with the policies. But,
right.
You could see a situation in which there are parents who, even if they were vaccinated themselves, just don't want to get their kids vaccinated yet and are uncomfortable. So I'm curious to see what happens with schools.
Yeah, I am too, especially because, the schools have been, one of the things that we haven't really talked that much about is the school year this year has been a wild success, just in terms of there haven't been these huge, it's happened in some places, especially some, unvaccinated places, but we haven't seen these like huge shutdowns, school districts going remote. More or less, kids are going to school, they're learning in person, and, there hasn't been some sort of big wave because of it, which is great.
Knock on wood, Carlo.
Yes,
Please.
Knock on wood.
Another story that we briefly mentioned yesterday that we want to go into more depth about right now. What exactly did China send flying across the globe this summer? According to a report in the Financial Times last week, Beijing carried out a test of a nuclear-capable hypersonic missile back in August, launching a rocket that circled the planet before missing its target by only 20 miles. China has claimed it was just testing a spacecraft, but U.S. intelligence agencies were reportedly caught off guard by the hypersonic test, or whatever it was, and fear that it shows that China could be far more advanced in building next-gen weapons than anyone thought.
So the difference, just a little primer here, the difference between a hypersonic missile and an intercontinental ballistic missile, an ICBM. ICBMs actually go faster, but you can't maneuver an ICBM. It lands basically where you point it, right? Gravity kind of does the rest. And China also already has ICBMs. They have for decades. It's not necessarily like a hypersonic missile would be some sort of grave new threat to the United States. Just because, if Beijing wanted to, they could wipe out the eastern seaboard today, right? We wouldn't even know until it would be too late for all of us.
Good morning, everyone. If you're just getting up, a happy thought to wake up on.
Yes, but in the same way that we could wipe out Beijing with our own ICBMs today, and they wouldn't know about it until it was too late. Mutually assured destruction is the theory that keeps that from happening, and that has kept us all alive basically since the Cold War. But I think that this is an important story, and I'm glad that you were on me yesterday about getting it in today, because it's just relevant to what we've been talking about, which is like, what is war going to look like in the future, and not the distant future. I'm talking like tomorrow, right? It ain't going to be ground troops staging in some desert in the Middle East for like 20 years. Those days are over. Now, I've said it before, but the thing that scares the hell out of me, again, more happy thoughts on this Wednesday morning, it isn't really necessarily stuff like this. It's new kinds of sort of technology that already exists, like drones, right? How long until a world leader is assassinated by an armed drone? That's going to happen. I hate to say it, but that's going to happen. And what is keeping a terrorist organization from using a fleet of unarmed drones to take down a commercial airliner by just flying them into the engines? I mean, I'm not trying to put these like morbid ideas into everybody's head here, but this is all food for thought, right? This is all stuff that we are going to have to deal with in our lifetimes.
Back to the hypersonic weapons, just to reel us in a tiny bit.
Sure. Fair.
So ABC News interviewed a military analyst, okay, and he said that the thing about the hypersonic weapon is that it goes about 5 times, it's very fast. And the U.S. cannot detect it, okay?
Right.
So the Chinese, he said, basically had been looking at the weapons that the U.S. has been spending money on for decades, going back to Reagan, and realized that they're all pointing north, that all of our focus had been pointing north because that was where we expected a threat to come from the Soviet Union or from North Korea. So China said, oh, they're not looking south. Let's do that. So they basically have this weapon that has the ability to come in from the south and kind of hit us from behind where we're not looking. He actually said, and I'm not going to echo what you said, but he said basically we have no ability to take this down. So the first thing that we would see in any sort of attack would be a mushroom cloud. Like we would genuinely not see it coming. And then he also said, look, we've been spending a ton of money on Iraq, Afghanistan, and the Chinese, have been coming after us. At the same time that we've been focused on other things, they've been developing these weapons that we just can't match. And that we absolutely cannot defend ourselves from. And he said, basically the U.S. has been in conflict with China for a very long time. We just didn't know it. No one was talking about it or focusing on it. And, it's not just militarily. Another area of concern, of course, is the economics. And we are seeing the impact of supply chain issues, which I know we're going to talk about coming up. Right. But China, not only do they do so much of the world's manufacturing? They're basically like the world's factory. China's also been quietly buying up ports across the globe, from Australia to Greece. Now they're looking at buying a port in Iran. So if you think China controls the supply chain now, imagine what it's going to be like in the future. And notably, one analyst, this is actually from NBC, they said basically the U.S. has been absent and has no plan to even try to do the same or try to compete. Like it's not even on our radar to do anything about it. And then there's the cultural aspect. Like I want to we're trying to bring on a guest to do a special podcast just on China, because I think what's going on right now is pretty fascinating. But he said that another report that I saw on the cultural front, and this is totally an aside as I switch gears here, China's preparing to pass a law to punish parents if their children misbehave or break the law. Which is kind of wild. It's called the Family Education Promotion Law. So parents would have to go undergo training if their kids break the law. So those are like the 3 points I wanted to hit on China, just in terms of military, economy, and also culturally. It's just a really fascinating time, and I think the point that we have been so focused on other things as a country and not really focused on China is one. I think perhaps we need to change that.
I think that's the takeaway. I mean, look, every day in this country, we are not spending $300 million to occupy Afghanistan, right? That's good. That's money that can be used for many, many different reasons. I would put it more into our country. But even if you're just going to keep it in the defense budget, use it to develop our own hypersonic missiles, right? Anything that is going to counter this new threat versus, it's what we do best, right? We try to solve the yesterday's problem, right? Like in Afghanistan.
That's a great. And if you're wondering, again, why you should care, think about the pandemic. This happened because in many ways because it happened in China. That's where it started, and then they covered it up and didn't tell anybody what was going on and said you couldn't get it from person to person.
Right.
Imagine if this actually was just squashed from the get-go where it started.
A great thought experiment.
Okay, on the note, though, about inflation and the issues that we're having with our supply chain, Procter & Gamble warning that it's going to raise prices on more household items like razors and toothpaste, saying that the supply chain and commodity costs are higher than the company had anticipated. P&G beat earnings expectations for the most recent quarter, in part because of price hikes that it had already made on everything from diapers to toilet paper. So they make Pampers and Charmin. Meantime, the Washington Post reporting this morning that the White House has considered tapping the National Guard to ease some of the supply chain bottlenecks. They're at least partially responsible for the price increases.
I went to Rite Aid yesterday to try and get a flu shot, which, my mistake. Nothing's easy, right? Nothing's easy right now. Everything's hard. So, of course, they didn't have them. But I noticed, I was like, I'm going to pick up some toothpaste while I'm over there. The toothpaste was literally under lock and key. How they put cold medicine in these stores and behind the lock and key so that the meth addicts don't take it. The toothpaste was now under lock and key. So always a sign that things are going well when you have to get the one person working in the store to unlock the Colgate for you.
Have you tried doing this, by the way? Because I've had to deal with this, and it's so awkward because I like to look at different products. Sometimes I don't necessarily. So deodorant is fully behind lock and key at the Duane Reade that I shop at, and it's just weird because then the person's basically waiting over your shoulder and you're kind of wait, I want to look at this one too, or you want to smell it or something, and it's just.
Well, especially because I always test the deodorants in the aisle. Is
that
weird?
Yes.
Okay. Anyway, we're going off the rails today, but I mentioned that first of all, this is more, I think, of a shoplifting issue than anything, but it's part of what we've been talking about.
That is what it is, but it's just it's a little brutal.
It's just
to go shopping.
Yeah, well, and again, it's what did I do? I didn't go find the guy. I just ordered it on Amazon because it was freaking easier, right? So anyway, I make that point because I wanted to mention this Quinnipiac poll that came out yesterday. This shocked me. My jaw was on the floor when I saw this number. 52% of Americans think that things are worse today than they were a year ago. You of course, remember October 2020, right? That famously chill period when the president of the United States was in the hospital with the deadly disease for which there was no cure, and we were on the precipice of the biggest wave of the pandemic. There were riots and civil unrest across the country. We were preparing to do our holidays by Zoom. But hey, gas was cheap. Your gallon of milk cost 89 cents less or whatever. Those supply chain disruptions just hadn't been apparent this time last year. But I think that poll is relevant because it shows you two things. One, it shows you that people are dumb. People are stupid. Americans are dumb. Sorry, but it's true. But more importantly, it shows you, and which is something that Democrats in the White House need to take note of, given that they control the government right now. This is what politics is, right? This is what people actually care about and who they blame for it, fairly or unfairly. I don't think it's Joe Biden's fault that the deodorant is under lock and key at Rite Aid. But they have to understand, Biden and his people, that is how people see politics, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I was shocked at that same poll from Quinnipiac, which had the favorability ratings. Joe Biden, 38% favorable, 50% unfavorable. Donald Trump right now, 39% favorable and 52% unfavorable. So it's basically the same, for both of them. And then I think that the poll also found about 78% of Republicans want Trump to run again. So we could very well be looking at a Trump v. Biden or a Trump v. Harris, depending on who, if Biden decides to run again.
I think honestly, I may move out of this country if that happens again. I don't think I can. I don't think I can emotionally handle it.
I think we're also underestimating what happens with inflation. I mean, for months now, economists from Jerome Powell, Janet Yellen, all have been saying inflation is transitory. So when we talk about new stimulus, and I'm not blaming the stimulus packages, but when you pump trillions of dollars into the economy, you have a lot more money floating around. And the argument has been, no, the costs are going to come down transitory. All right, well, isn't the definition of transitory short term? It has been months, it's getting worse, and every single company or economist now looking at it says it's not going to get better in terms of these prices until mid next year, the earliest.
Yeah. The one thing to just note on that is this is happening around the world, right? This is not a U.S. specific thing. Prices are going up everywhere. The supply chains are hitting everywhere. There's only so much that the United States president can do, whether it's Biden, Trump, or whoever, to get, factory garment workers in Vietnam to go to work during a COVID outbreak, or to, Biden can't get out there and get on, one of these container ships outside in the Pacific Ocean and steer it to port, right? I just think that these, and I would say this the same about if Trump was president. I just don't. These are, we live in a globalized world, right? And this is showing us that there's only so much that the federal government, as powerful as it is, can do to stop these things.
And despite the fact that companies are dealing with this, especially these huge companies, none of them are now saying, oh, let's manufacture in the U.S. None of them are taking, that's not the takeaway from anyone, because it's still so much less expensive to just do it overseas and ship it back.
Exactly.
Despite the issues. Okay, Zillow says it's going to stop flipping homes, at least through the end of the year, as it deals with supply and labor shortages that have hit the construction industry particularly hard. The real estate website has a program, it's called Zillow Offers, in which it buys homes directly from sellers in cash, does the needed renovations, and then lists them for sale. The idea being that the service allows homeowners to avoid the hassle of selling themselves for a fee. Zillow is going to focus on selling off its existing inventory before restarting the program.
I thought this was interesting because there's this business model of tech-enabled home flipping that they're calling iBuying. It has been accused of inflating home prices. That's a little bit unfair, I think, just because it's just not big enough. I mean, Zillow and Opendoor, which is the other big player in this iBuying field, they say that they're buying thousands of homes. It's not really enough to have a big impact on the housing supply. But I find it fascinating just because as a business model, I don't see how it works. I mean, having been through this process, there is so much friction when you're buying or selling a home. I just don't think that that's something that you can fix with an algorithm, which is essentially what these companies, are trying to do here.
The NBA regular season is underway, but not without headaches stemming from a drama-filled offseason. Two of the league's biggest stars are sitting out of their openers for different reasons. So the Brooklyn Nets played without Kyrie Irving in the season opener against the defending champs, the Milwaukee Bucks, last night. Irving is the lone NBA player unable to play because of his refusal to get vaccinated.
Meanwhile, the Philadelphia 76ers open their season tonight, and it will be without Ben Simmons, who has been suspended one game for conduct detrimental to the team after he was bounced from practice for basically just refusing to practice, refusing to do drills. So taken together, it's just, there is truly nothing worse than pro athletes acting like babies, right?
I don't even understand that. That's I'm going to come to work, but I'm not doing this podcast, Carlo. Sorry, you're on your own.
Right, yeah. Honestly, it's kind of like what some of the police are doing by just sort of not working over these vaccine mandates. Everybody's just acting like a toddler in this country right now. It's infuriating.
Netflix added 4.4 million members in the last quarter, beating its own expectations, in part because of the popularity of Squid Game. That series premiered just before the quarter ended. Netflix's surprisingly good quarter comes as the company's in the midst of this PR debacle. As we know, we've been talking about the Dave Chappelle special. Some employees are planning a walkout today in protest of that most recent comedy special. Co-CEO Ted Sarandos addressing the continued criticism over the special. He told Variety that he did screw up in the handling of employee concerns. Sarandos had previously said he does not believe that content on screen can lead to real-world violence, but now says that his view is a little bit more nuanced. So they're still, keeping the special up, but, it's sort of an apology.
Yeah, I mean, notably, he did not back down in terms of the calls to cancel that special or to cancel Chappelle himself, whose deal with Netflix is done anyway. So I'm not even exactly sure what the sort of woke police who are still all up in arms about this are agitating over this. I mean, this is one of those things I just don't really understand. But I did think in the Netflix earnings release yesterday was interesting. They're going to start to change the way that they disclose viewership information. So it used to be that they would count the number of accounts that viewed at least 2 minutes of a program. The streamer now says they're going to tabulate the total number of hours viewed, which frankly is even more confusing. So if you look at what they released, they say that Bridgerton season 1 was watched for 625 million hours. It's like, okay, what is that? I don't know. What does that mean, right? I don't know. Like, can these companies just tell you like how many people watched these shows, right? What were their hits and what were their misses? Like as television networks have been doing for years now.
But I don't even know if television networks have, because Nielsen, I mean, what do they count as a view? How long do you have to watch a program? I mean, I think it's not many, it's not like you have to watch from start to finish. You could just kind of be flipping, leave it on for a minute, and I think that counts. I'm actually not sure, but I think the problem here is that it's apples to oranges comparisons, and so it's very difficult right now, given that you've got network TV, you've got cable, you've stream, you've got people listening to stuff. I basically get all of my news, by the way. I listen to the broadcast of ABC News and NBC News of their nightly programs, because those I think are still the programs of record. I just listen to them on podcasts. So I'm not really counting as a viewer. The whole thing, it's very hard to tabulate.
It's hard to understand.
And figure out who's watching what. All right, let's do a little more to know before you go. Europe, the only region in the world to see rising COVID cases last week, according to data from the World Health Organization. Britain, Russia, and Turkey accounted for most of the 7% rise in new infections. It's the third consecutive week that cases have been rising on that continent.
The good news, of course, there is that they're not rising in other places, including here in Africa and in the Pacific Rim. Northern California and the rest of the Pacific Northwest, talk about good news. They're going to see some much needed rain over the next few days, like a lot of rain, potentially enough to help put an end to this terrible fire season. So stay dry out there, but it could be some very good news for that area.
Facebook reportedly planning to change its corporate name as soon as next week. Our former colleague Alex Heath reporting in The Verge that Facebook wants a new name that better reflects its focus on the metaverse. It's not clear what the name is.
Oh, I'm curious to see what this is. Yeah, I don't know what. It's going to be something stupid. You know it. President Biden. They should just go back. What was the original name? Like Face Mash or whatever, when it was like remember that? When
Wasn't
like the original idea.
Facebook?
Well, it was the Facebook, but before that, when Zuckerberg was just trying to, when his idea was just to like rate girls on campus, it was Hot or Not or Face Mash or something like that. Anyway.
That's how this all started, with just like a college boy ratting out.
Exactly. Totally. Never forget that, by the way. It's a really important life lesson, I guess. President Biden telling House progressives that tuition-free community college is out of the big spending package. That's per multiple sources in the Washington Post and CNN today. The child tax credit, not going to go as far as some of them would like, looking like it's going to be a one-year extension. White House is racing to broker a deal on this economic bill. The final price tag looking like it's going to be in the $1.8 trillion range now.
Kanye West is officially just... Yay. Sorry, not Yee. Yay. Y-E, but pronounced Yay. The rapper's request to formally change his name was approved by a judge. The artist formerly known as Kanye has been seen around New York City sporting a creepy prosthetic face mask to go along with his new name. And he was hanging out with, what's his name? Michael Cohen, Trump's former lawyer.
Becky sent me that picture Becky sent me that picture in Page Six yesterday, and she was just like, "Imagine showing this to yourself like 5 years ago. Like, what would you even say?" I put it in the newsletter today if you want to see it. Why do they even know each other? There's so many questions that I don't have answers for. And finally, in baseball news, the Astros and the Dodgers both got much-needed wins in the ALCS and the NLCS. Houston beat the Red Sox 9-2 to tie up that series, while LA beat the Braves 6-5 for their first win of that series.
All right, that's what you need to know for Wednesday, October 20th.
Okay, see you mañana.